Producers never said there was anything to hide about Jamie Dornan and Dakota Johnson. Publicly, the narrative was always clean, professional, and carefully framed. Yet longtime fans insist that something quietly shifted behind the scenes, not because of scandal, but because certain moments felt too real to be left untouched. What producers didn't want fans to see wasn't wrongdoing, it was unpredictability. In the early phase of promotion, interactions between Jamie and Dakota appeared noticeably unguarded. Interviews carried a loose rhythm, answers flowed without interruption, and reactions sometimes arrived before either of them seemed aware of the camera. These moments weren't dramatic, but they were human, and that humanity made them difficult to control. As visibility increased, so did management. Fans noticed interviews becoming shorter, edits tighter, and transitions quicker. Conversations that once lingered were now redirected, often mid-thought, towards safer topics or third-party commentary. Nothing was removed outright, but emphasis changed, and emphasis is everything. Behind-the-scenes content followed the same pattern. Early footage showed relaxed exchanges, shared laughter, and moments of mutual ease that didn't feel rehearsed. Later material focused almost exclusively on process, technique, and performance, reducing interpersonal dynamics to background noise. The warmth didn't disappear, but it stopped being centered. Producers are trained to protect a narrative, especially when a project depends on mass appeal. A story that feels emotionally ambiguous can quickly drift beyond intended boundaries. In this case, the ambiguity wasn't about romance or conflict, but about connection that resisted clear definition. Fans argue that this was the turning point. Once producers realized that unfiltered moments invited interpretation, those moments became liabilities. Not because they were inappropriate, but because they were open-ended. Open-ended stories are difficult to manage in a franchise environment. The strategy wasn't censorship, it was redirection. Cameras cut away sooner, questions were reframed, and interactions were contextualized through editing choices. By guiding attention elsewhere, producers reduced the risk of fans focusing on what couldn't be easily explained. What made this approach noticeable was consistency. The same adjustments appeared across multiple platforms and over time. This wasn't a one-off decision or a reaction to a single incident. It was a sustained effort to narrow the lens through which fans viewed the dynamic. Ironically, narrowing the lens made fans more attentive. Once something feels managed, audiences begin searching for what's missing. Older clips gained new relevance as points of comparison. What had once felt ordinary now felt revealing simply because it was no longer accessible. Producers likely believed they were simplifying the story. In practice, they created a second one. The absence of certain moments became a narrative in itself, inviting speculation not about what happened, but about why access changed. Importantly, nothing suggested conflict between Jamie and Dakota. Their professionalism remained intact, and public appearances continued smoothly. The tension existed not between them, but between what fans sensed and what they were shown. This distinction matters. Fans weren't accusing producers of hiding a secret relationship or covering up misconduct. They were reacting to the feeling that authenticity had been deprioritized. When authenticity fades, curiosity fills the gap. The decision to manage visibility more tightly was likely made in good faith. Emotional nuance can overshadow a project if it becomes the focal point. By streamlining the image, producers protected the work from becoming secondary to speculation. Yet in doing so, they underestimated modern audiences. Fans don't need explicit confirmation to stay engaged. They read patterns, compare timelines, and notice when access changes. Control doesn't eliminate attention, it redirects it. What producers didn't want fans to see may have been nothing more than unfiltered human connection. But unfiltered moments are powerful precisely because they resist narrative control. They don't clarify, they complicate. By quietly pulling those moments out of focus, producers shaped a cleaner story at the cost of a messier truth. That trade-off worked in the short term, but it left behind a lingering sense that something genuine had been edited down rather than addressed. This first part of the story isn't about exposing what was hidden. It's about recognizing how stories are shaped by what's minimized. When certain moments stop appearing without explanation, fans don't forget them. They begin to look harder. And in that surge, the absence becomes louder than any image ever shown. Once fans accepted that something was being managed rather than erased, the focus shifted. The question was no longer what producers hid, but why they felt the need to guide perception so carefully. That distinction transformed casual curiosity into sustained analysis. When visibility changes without explanation, audiences fill the gap themselves. Fans began revisiting archived footage, not looking for scandal, but for context. Older clips were slowed down, compared, and placed side by side with newer material. The contrast didn't reveal secrets, it revealed intention. The more controlled the content became, the more valuable unguarded moments felt. A laugh cut short, a glance redirected, a question answered too quickly, all of it gained weight. These fragments weren't proof of anything dramatic, but they suggested that something once deemed acceptable had been quietly reclassified as unnecessary. Producers often believe that simplification creates clarity. In reality, it creates friction. When stories feel overly polished, audiences question what's missing. Clean narratives don't invite trust, consistency does. And once fans sensed inconsistency, they began watching more closely. This is where the strategy backfired. By reducing exposure to spontaneous interaction, producers unintentionally elevated its significance. What was once background texture became foreground intrigue. Fans didn't need confirmation, they needed pattern, and pattern was exactly what they found. The decision to keep silent reinforced the effect. No clarification meant no boundary. Without a defined line, fans couldn't tell where normal professionalism ended and editorial caution began. Silence became part of the narrative rather than a way to avoid one. It's important to note that nothing pointed to conflict or misconduct. The dynamic between Jamie Dornan and Dakota Johnson remained publicly respectful and stable. The tension lived elsewhere, in the space between authenticity and presentation. Producers likely viewed their actions as protective rather than deceptive. In franchise environments, emotional ambiguity can distract from the work itself. Steering attention away from interpersonal nuance was a way to keep the focus on performance and story. But audiences don't separate those elements as cleanly as producers hope. Viewers are drawn to what feels human, not what feels safe. When humanity is edited down, it doesn't disappear, it becomes suspicious. Over time, fans stopped asking whether something inappropriate had happened. They started asking whether something authentic had been deprioritized. That shift in framing made the conversation more durable, not less. Every new appearance reinforced the pattern. Interactions were cordial, measured, and efficient. That efficiency stood in contrast to earlier looseness, and contrast invites interpretation. The more controlled things appeared, the more fans assumed control was necessary. This is the paradox of image management. The act of smoothing edges draws attention to the edges themselves. By managing what fans saw, producers taught fans how to look. In the long run, the strategy achieved its immediate goal. The official narrative held. There were no headlines, no disruptions, no forced explanations. The films and performances remained the focus in mainstream coverage. Alongside that success, however, a parallel narrative persisted. It lived in forums, compilations, and quiet analysis. It didn't claim truth, it explored absence. And absence proved to be a powerful storytelling device. Fans didn't feel misled so much as redirected. That redirection carried its own message. Some aspects of the dynamic were considered less suitable for public consumption. Whether that judgment was correct or necessary remains subjective. What's clear is that restraint shaped engagement. The more carefully moments were framed, the more fans became invested in what framing couldn't fully contain. Speculation thrived not on revelation, but on omission. By the end, the story wasn't about what producers didn't want fans to see. It was about how the act of not showing something altered the way everything else was perceived. Control didn't close the narrative, it elongated it. In modern fandom, absence is not neutral. It invites meaning. And once meaning takes hold, it rarely fades. Producers may have guided the image successfully, but they also created a lasting sense that something genuine had been quietly placed out of reach. That sense, more than any hidden moment, is what continues to keep fans watching, rewatching, and questioning long after the official story appears settled.